is the basis of all independence.
Once the Africans had brought their spirituality over to the Americas, their spirituality was used as a weapon, okay? Just like I said, spirituality wasn't limited to something that you did on one day of the week, on Saturdays or Sundays. Spirituality was your lifeline, it was your lifestyle. It kept you alive, it kept you healthy, it kept you free. And don't believe this concept that Africans didn't free themselves, okay? Because one of the fallacies of the argument that Europeans freed African people is that they only acknowledge European law. Africans been freeing themselves ever since they got off the first slave ship. And they freed themselves by remembering and acknowledging their true history and their ancestral knowledge. Whether it was the ancestral spirits, whether it was the knowledge of the medicines, or whether it was that ability to spread smallpox or spread poisons. See, there was a secret knowledge. In fact, even if you go to Jamaica, Jamaica has a system known as obia. Obia has negative connotations associated with it today, but that word obia actually comes from the Igbo word dibia, D-I-B-I-A, or obia, O-B-I-A, which really means somebody who has a wealth of knowledge, holistic knowledge, and wisdom with any particular thing. All right, that's what the original word comes from, and it was associated with spiritual priests in Igbo land, Nigeria. But see, what happens is once these same Africans got transported into the transatlantic slave trade and got to the Americas, their spirituality, their knowledge was so powerful that the Europeans forced these individuals to forget about any aspects of their knowledge. You could not practice your spiritual systems because those same spiritual systems were used in engaging in warfare. An example of this would be in the religion of Ifa, Ogun. Ogun was the god of war. Ogun was the god of metallurgy. Ogun was the god of paving the way in civilization. Okay? Ogun was also the god of the saber or the machete or the sword. Now, when you went to the Haitian plantations in the year 1791, the tool that they used on those plantations, not only in Haitian plantations, but all sugar plantations, was the machete. So how convenient was it for the enslaved Africans who already believed in a god of war known as Ogun, whose weapon was the machete, for them to be using that same tool. So in 1791, when it came time to revolt against their colonial masters, they invoked the god of Ogun. And the Haitians were able to rise up and defeat the French, defeat the British, and defeat the Spanish, and create their own independent country. Same thing happened in Cuba. Antonio Maceo, who was one of the generals, a black general in the Cuban army in their war for independence against Spain, he thought it wise to actually invoke the god of Ogun and galvanize his troops with Ogun as well. And he gave his troops machetes. Even though he had guns to give them, he wanted to give them machetes, and they wanted machetes because the machete was the weapon of Ogun, the god of war. Even when you look at all the different slave revolts all throughout American history, Jamaican history, Brazilian history, a lot of those histories, you see the same pattern of African spirituality being invoked. Whether it's Francois Macandal, the great poisoner of Saint-Domingue in Haiti, or whether it's Dutty Boukman, the one who invoked the voodoo ceremony in Haiti, or whether it's Queen Nanny in Jamaica, the Jamaican Maroons, or whether it's Gullah Jack in South Carolina Conspiracy 1822 Denmark Vesey, or any of these, or whether it's Bala in Dominica, they all had the same thing in common, and that was the fact that they invoked their spiritual ancestors, and they also used these spiritual African concepts that we're talking about today. The drum was also banned. Why was the drum banned? Because the drum had power. The drum wasn't, see, we think of music today as just something that you just dance and get entertained to. But the European was entertained by the things that the Africans did. Even though the Africans had true meaning and substance behind what they were doing. The drum was played to invoke the spirits. The drum was played to invoke the energy. And each drum was associated with a particular spirit and a particular energy. And each energy was associated with a particular leaf. They were all these things went hand in hand. So even if you don't, even if you want to reject all the what people call witchcraft stuff, because that's what the Europeans had convinced us to think about African religions. It's all witchcraft. It's bad. It's black magic. It's bad for you. They called it black magic because the Africans pulled from their knowledge, their philosophy. The Africans pulled from their philosophy in order to defeat the European. So of course it's going to look like black magic and negative to you, because they're in pulling from what they know in order to defeat you. And they convinced all the other Africans after that their knowledge and understanding of themselves is completely iniquitous, evil. It's the devil's doing. It's the devil's work. And then they imposed other concepts of Christianity on you. And it just doesn't mean that Christianity is incompatible with the African spiritual systems. I wouldn't necessarily say that's so. But when you practice a doctrine, a rigid doctrine of Christianity, a rigid version of it, and you compartmentalize your health, your physical health from your spiritual health, this is when I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think you need to be able to reach and associate all these things together, because it's very important. And in the end, I will end with this. In the early 1900s, Theodore Roosevelt, he and his Congress eventually passed the Food, Drug, and Administration Act. The FDA was introduced, and a lot of your conjure doctors, root doctors, your spiritualists, and a lot of these black communities throughout the United States were put out of a job because they weren't sanctioned under these new rules. And this is what you end up having, is people start to abandon traditional doctors or traditional medicines or traditional way of being to go into the government sanctioned medicines, which don't always have your best interest at hand. So if you can get your own land, then I think you can be independent spiritually and mentally and physically. So I suggest that you guys do that. And remember this, the revolution will not be pesticides.
Land is the basis of all independence.